All right. Okay, so there'll still be times if you have any questions at the end, I can still come back and answer any questions you might have. We will have more time to talk about the midterm on Monday. So, but if you've looked at those questions, you can ask me about it now. Okay, so if you had a chance, hopefully you've seen the lecture from last class about Orientalism, right? So, and the point of that was, it's this article that I'm going to talk about today from Kondo uses Said's Orientalism to uses Said's Orientalism to discuss David Henry Huang's play in Butterfly. His play in Butterfly, and so I wanted to hopefully that made sense. You know, as I talked about, Said's work is like really important. Was really important for looking at the relationship between research and truth, between the word and the world, right? About between reality and how we represent it through language, and how language is just shot through. Language and discourse is shot through with politics and power. And so you've heard about Foucault. Said is a really good application of Foucault. And so during Kondo's article, kind of shows how anthropologists have used some of these ideas. And so it's a really good example of that. And so I'm going to share my screen. I have slides for the last part of this, which is just basically Kondo's article. All right, so I'm going to share my screen here, and hopefully you'll be able to see it. Okay. Where's the button for that? Breakout rooms, reactions, record chat. Oh yeah, there we go. Share screen. Okay. So I'm going to share. Hopefully you should be able to see this. Let me know if you can't see it. So I'm going to share this one. Share it. Okay. Hopefully, so you're seeing this PowerPoint screen. Thumbs up. Okay. Very nice. Okay. Yeah, it's the first time I've done this, so bear with me. Okay, so in Butterfly is a critique of essentialist identity. And so by the end of this, you should have a sense for, if you don't already, what she means by essentialist identity. And what that means is like basically these ideas that you are your race, or you are your gender. There are only two genders, or there's a fixed number of racial identifications. So that there's only a certain number of legitimate nations in the world. So that's what they mean by essentialist identity. That's what she means there. And so that article, which is a little dense, if you haven't looked at it yet, it's a little dense to read. It's fun to read because of what she's talking about, but some of the theoretical points do get a little thick. But if you have you should have a basic understanding of post-structuralism, so it shouldn't, the wording is a little thick, but it's pretty easy to follow, and I'm kind of walking you through her argument in this. And so in Butterfly, the first slide here is a couple of screen grabs from, oops, let me go back. These are stills from different productions of M Butterfly, which was like a Tony Award-winning Broadway rewriting of a classic opera, Madama Butterfly. So, and so I'm going to talk about that because she talks about it in the article. So we'll get to that later. But you should recognize some of the tropes already, right, with the strong white male, like figure. Some of the same stuff I talked about with Said before. The strong but damaged Western guy, and the stereotypical Asian, or at the time they would have said Oriental, like the stereotypical East Asian woman here. So and this is in Madama Butterfly, the opera that Huang is critiquing with this play is actually, it might be the first example of that story that I talked about in the Said lecture last class. It's the origin of that story, like Avatar, Dances with Wolves, Last Samurai. This is kind of like the first major production of that kind of story. So, and it's still, Madama Butterfly you can see anywhere, any day. I mean, not right now, but in normal times you can see it at any Broadway or off Broadway theater. It's the most famous opera ever. Like still, like so after 100 years. So okay, so what's the point of the article? And I'll post, again, I'll be posting this video online in the future, so you can go back and look at these slides. And maybe it may be easier to just post the slideshow, or maybe I'll figure out a way to do that. So actually, as dark as the story is, her article is about how there's hope in a lot of this. So post-structuralist identity theory can get a little dark sometimes and feel hopeless. Like there's no escape from all the politics of identity, that there is no way to step outside of it, because those politics is who we are. But what this film is showing is that, what this article is showing is that if we take this framework, you can make changes in the cultural realm. You don't have to have a revolution. You don't have to smash the means of the mode of production to at least make life more livable for some people. And so in that way, it's more hopeful. So yeah, we are all politics, but we have agency in the realm of culture and politics. And Huang's play in Butterfly is an example of how you can use culture to make changes even in places that are repressive, right? So we can change these naturalized power relations if we can change the cultural symbols associated with them. So he's saying that, yeah, all this stuff, even identity itself, is shot through with power at every turn. But you can do things. You can tweak things. Language is, if we can imagine culture as like a language, language can be changed, language can be altered, language can be tweaked in a way that helps people or frees people or whatever, however you want to think about it. So, so it's about how the playwright David Henry Hwang manipulates Orientalist ideas on gender and identity in the original opera, Madama Butterfly, and she subverts these categories in creative and productive ways. So. Okay, so I'll just jump in. So as I talk about this, and again, this was intended to be the second half of the Orientalism lecture, and usually this is about 45 minutes. I don't know how long it's going to take in this context, but in this format. But so in Butterfly, so as a critique, so the article has 3 different narratives in it. So there's 3 different levels, and so that's how I talk about it. Level 1 is Puccini's original opera, Madama Butterfly. Like Madama Butterfly, again, that's the famous opera. Level 2 is Huang's In Butterfly, which is a rewriting of Madama Butterfly. And again, it won a lot of Tony Awards. It's still being played. That's actually becoming fairly popular too. There was a Hollywood film directed by David Cronenberg from 1993. So it was so popular, it became a Hollywood film, In Butterfly. And then there's Kondo's article, which discusses those 2 things. Okay, so Madama Butterfly. So again, this is the original opera. This is a couple of pictures from different productions. Again, this is playing everywhere. If we weren't all isolating socially, you could go see this tonight in Los Angeles somewhere. I mean, again, it's the most famous. It's not just the most famous and most popular and most beloved Orientalist texts, as Said would put it. It's not just the most famous Orientalist text. It's the most famous opera ever. Like, so any opera house at any given time is probably running a production of Madama Butterfly. People eat this up. It's what people want to see. And it's just there. And that's why Huang decided to take it on, because he sees it as being something that's violent toward people of Asian and Middle Eastern descent. It's like it just encapsulates everything that Said was talking about so well. Yet it's still popular. That message hasn't gotten through to everyone that, wow, this story is really messed up. And that's what M Butterfly, that's kind of the point of M Butterfly, just to show how messed up this story is and why do we find it so captivating, right? One thing I will say about one of the image on the left, I won't revisit this later, but it's just kind of a side note, a footnote. That is the quintessential Orientalist picture of Asian womanhood, right? It's always the nape of the neck, like that area between the shoulder blade and the back of the ear. That picture, you've seen that picture in a million different shots. I could have, if I Googled The Last Samurai, you would get the exact same picture of the woman that Tom Cruise marries in it. Like, it's that image just comes up over and over and over again. It's a image of submissiveness and demureness, the submissiveness is in the picture in the right, right? That's what in Butterfly, that's what the American man uses to manipulate the main character, right? It's this fantasy of submissiveness of Asian womanhood. So there's the sexuality on the left, the submissiveness on the right, and what Huang and Kondo are trying to get at. It's like, where do these stereotypes come from? Well, what they're going to argue, spoiler alert, they're going to say these are just Western fantasies, and these are all women created by men. Like, these aren't based on reality; they're based on fantasy. Does that mean there aren't any Asian women in the world who embody some of these characteristics? Yeah, probably. But there are also non-Asian women that embody some of these characteristics. The point is, how do these identities connect with larger geopolitical forces? And that's kind of something I'll get into later. But so yeah, it gets a little complicated, it gets a little sticky, it gets a little messy, but yeah, those are kind of two of the main images that encapsulate this thing. So Madama Butterfly. So I'll just briefly go through the story of Madama Butterfly. This is, I have to admit, I've never seen the play before. I just read this article. I was never interested, so I should see it since I've been giving this lecture for years. But you don't have to see the play to really get what she's doing in the article, because she does walk you through the main plot points. And I can say that I've never seen the play, but I can see the story just recurs so much that we've all seen elements of this story. So you know how the story is going to go, even if you've never seen it, just because this story is just such a part of Western culture in Europe and in America and Europe. It's such a central story that it's almost like biblical stories. You don't have to be a Christian to know certain parts of the New Testament, right? Just because it's just everywhere, right? So same thing with Madama Butterfly. You don't have to have seen it because you've seen parts of this everywhere. So the main story is an American meets a Japanese woman. So American meets a Japanese opera singer named Butterfly. These are my notes. I guess it's like, wait a minute, why did I say that? My notes are simpler than how I say it in class. Okay, so an American meets a Japanese opera singer. They marry in Japan. The American man leaves for 3 years because he's on assignment. He's a diplomat. He gets called back to the States, right? So then he leaves. He goes back, gets reassigned. He leaves for 3 years. Leaves Butterfly in Japan. As he goes to the U.S., he gets married again in the U.S. To a white woman. He marries a white woman in the U.S. But eventually he finds out that Butterfly was pregnant when he left. He didn't know it, but he finds out. He gets word that he has a son in Japan. And so eventually he returns to Japan to reclaim his son, to like, hey, you got my son. My kid's American. He's not Japanese, right? So, and so Butterfly pleads with him to, leave him there and even moreover, come back to Japan. Let's get married. We have a son. Let's just make a family. So she waits for him to come back, right? He doesn't go back initially. She waits for him to come back, and she waits, and then eventually he comes back for 3 years. After 3 years, with the American wife, he brings his wife with him. He finds out about the son, and then he wants to raise him in the U.S. A struggle ensues between them, not a physical struggle, but a struggle ensues about who's going to raise their son. Eventually, the Japanese woman Butterfly relents and gives him the son. And then this is the scene that's the most famous scene in the history of opera, right? She gives him the son, and then she has a long monologue at the end of it, and then she kills herself. She commits seppuku, right? The ritual disembowelment with the samurai sword, right? And the famous quote is, "Death with honor is better than life without honor." She can't stand to live with this kind of losing this much face, and so she dies. The end. And then everyone talks about how this scene is just beautiful, and everyone cries. There's a gong at the end, and the curtain falls, and it's like that's the end of the play, and everyone talks about how this is beautiful. And so that's Madama Butterfly. It's actually a pretty simple story, and this is addressed in Butterfly, and I'll talk about that in a second. But so David Henry Hwang wants to take this on. He's an Asian American playwright and author. based in Los Angeles. Actually, he pops up. You can find interviews with him everywhere, including another chapter in Kondo's books. He has a really long interview with him. It's really interesting, but he pops up on public radio a lot. Sometimes just interview, but he takes this story on because growing up as an Asian American man, he's just offended by this. Like, this is so messed up. Why do people see this as natural? And so if you think of it, as I talked about last lecture, if you think about Orientalism as the ideological superstructure of imperialism and global capitalism, right? This is what these kinds of stories are not consciously. It's not a conscious thing. It's just that this feels natural to people, and that this kind of naturalizes the power relation between East and West, between developed world and developing world. So remember, this is from 100 years ago. Japan was not a capitalist superpower yet. I mean, they were powerful, but they weren't. They weren't what. It's not what it was now, and that's kind of important to explaining all this. So, all right, so that's Madama Butterfly. That's the original text, and so now we move to M Butterfly. So David Henry Hwang, again, the playwright in Los Angeles, decides, like, you know what, I'm going to write a different version of this. So in his version, instead of American, the main character is a French diplomat named Gallimard, and he meets a Japanese opera singer. That's same thing. It turns out, they fall in love, they have a romance, right? He's assigned to Japan. He's a diplomat in Japan, falls in love with the Japanese opera singer. It turns out that the opera singer is actually a male Chinese spy. So not a woman, is a male from China, not even Japanese, Chinese spy, and he is using this relationship to manipulate Gallimard, the French diplomat, to steal secrets in the context of World War I, right? So, oh no, not World War I, World War II. So, because this takes place, the backdrop of this is the Chinese Revolution, the Communist Revolution in China, all is happening at the same time. So, and actually, I'll pause to say this. I just learned this like 2 years ago. I didn't know it, but this is based on a true story. These are actual people. It's a rewriting of a true story, but I was just listening to NPR one day, and they were like, oh yeah, and they interviewed the guy, the French guy, and he was like, yeah. I was like, so anyway, so the opera singer is actually a male Chinese spy. So they have a 20-year relationship, and in the play, it's this is why it's called M Butterfly. So it's not Madama Butterfly, it's not Madame Butterfly. So there's some play with gender here, and with sexuality in some ways. So they have a 20-year relationship. Butterfly submits to Gallimard over the course of their 20-year relationship, and in the play, there's some scenes that make it clear that Gallimard has never seen Butterfly naked, right? And there's one key scene that Kondo talks about in the article where, Gallimard has had a bad day at work. He comes home, he's grouchy, he's like, whatever. And so he gets frustrated and just says, like, you know what, I've never seen you naked before. Like, why is it that we had all this relationship and, it's like, I've never seen you naked. And Kondo discusses how does Butterfly deal with that? So again, this is a male Chinese spy using their relationship, sex and all, right, using their relationship to manipulate a French diplomat, right? So in that moment, Butterfly, and she calls it a master stroke. She's like, he said that, okay, this isn't about sex, it's about submission. So she just kind of bows to him and says that whatever you want to do with me, do with me. And that kind of just melts him, right? And so it calms him down because, Butterfly, who knows what he's doing, is saying that basically you just want me to submit right now. Like, it's not about sex at all. So again, he still hasn't seen him naked. And yeah, you get running through. It's like, well, how are they having sex? They've never seen each other naked. Well, and there have been cases of you can conceal identity and have sex somehow. So in the 90s, anyway. So, but okay, so Butterfly understands that their relationship is all about power. It's not about, love. Yeah. Okay. But in a certain way, and I'll get to that later. So Gallimard falls in love with this perfect woman, because it's a a very nuanced, very perfect performance of what the perfect woman would be to a French white guy, right? So, because she makes him feel more masculine at work as a diplomat, and so, and okay, so I'll come back to that point when I discuss it a little bit more. So Gallimard screws up at work because of his new masculinity. So the more feminine Butterfly becomes, the more submissive she becomes, the more masculine, the more risk taking, and he starts to take all these risks. He becomes too overly aggressive in his job, and he starts to make mistakes, right, at work. He starts to reveal more secrets, and so eventually he makes so many mistakes that that Gallimard gets caught and he gets accused of being a spy, of not just being a diplomat but being a spy. Butterfly actually gets exposed by the Chinese. The Chinese catch up to Butterfly and accuse her of she is working as a spy for the Chinese Communist Party, but they're saying that their lifestyle has become opulent, so that's not good for the Chinese Communist Party, right? So they're saying like, okay, you're being too opulent. What is all this stuff like living like a rich person? And they're communists, right? So they both get thrown in jail actually together, right? And so there's a big reveal scene. This is when Gallimard finds out that Butterfly is actually a man. They get literally stripped naked, and just to make the point that okay, here we are with our bodies, and like how do you react to this, right? This person you've been in love with for 20 years is actually a man, and you didn't know it. So they have this big discussion. They actually have they have this really important dialogue through prison bars, right? And and so Gallimard obviously is upset. He's depressed that that Butterfly is only a man. You're not this perfect woman that I thought you were. But then and it's actually a discussion. They're kind of negotiating. So Butterfly says like, wait a minute, you were in love with me. Like, what does my gender identity have to do with this, right? Weren't you in love with me, the person? And Gallimard, and then Butterfly even appeals to him, saying like, "Hey, we can if gender is something. If we have to be cross gender, why don't you be a woman for I was a woman for 20 years. Why don't you be the woman now? I'll be the guy. That doesn't matter. We're in love with each other, right?" And so got it. And Butterfly, wants him to become more than a man, right? Like trying to transcend. He's saying that we can still be together. We just have to transcend gender. Like, what is this whole thing? Gender, sexuality, what is all this stuff? Why are you worried about that? And what about my humanness? That's kind of what she's saying, or he's saying. And so she even says, you can be the woman in the relationship. And it tops it off. Butterfly tops it off by saying like, I'm Asian, so Gallimard could never see me as a man anyway, right? So I'm still like, and beyond all this, like you never saw me as even as an Asian man, you don't see me as fully masculine anyway, right? So he goes there, right? So in the end, Gallimard chooses the fantasy, and I think he uses those words. I choose the fantasy because she was the perfect woman. Because and what Huang is saying, and this is what Kondo kind of pulls out in her analysis, is that what he's in through the interview with Huang too. It's like basically, he loves her so much because she's the perfect woman. But what makes her the perfect woman? It's because she was created by a man, right? She's not. Sorry, I just noticed my lights off there. Okay, so she's the perfect woman because she is one that's created by a man. Who knows more what men want than another man, right? And so if they are in this situation where they can create this fantasy character woman, it would be the perfect woman, right? And so this is something, and so Kondo kind of pulls this out and applies it to pop culture, that these characters we fall in love with, that men, for example, fall in love with these female characters from movies and things like that, is because more often than not, they're created by other men. Right, and so they're not related to reality; they're related to the discourse of femininity, right? Which is very male dominated, at least it was for most of modern history. So Gallimard chooses the fantasy because he wants this perfect woman because she made him feel more masculine. And Kondo was even going to say that, like, he's not in love with Butterfly; he's in love with himself. It's like this act of solipsism, right? It's just he's in love with his own masculinity because she reflects it. And that's what's so perfect about it. And so in the end, Gallimard kills himself He paints himself up in geisha attire, and then he kills himself. The end. So it's kind of this total rewriting of the original Madama Butterfly narrative. Butterfly goes to jail in China because of the revolution. Gallimard kills himself on stage. He puts on makeup while he's explaining his choice of the fantasy, and then he kills himself. And so, but people don't see that as beautiful. They just say that's really messed up. So again, I would say read the article. She has more detail there, and then she ties it all together. Okay, so what does all this mean? Okay, so took this classic play and rewrote it, right? Whoever, could y'all mute yourselves? I'm hearing some background noise right now. I don't know. So if you're not muted, try to mute. All right. So Kondo's article, last thing. So Huang criticizes Orientalism by showing that our ideas about manhood and womanhood they're just really arbitrary, right? They're based on fantasy in a lot of places. They're not fixed. These aren't biological assignments. They are just interpretations of that. They're cultural interpretations of it. And she calls it, the way she puts it, is that gender is only a loosely fit organization of power-laden cultural symbols. Like love is only of the perfect self through the mirror of the other. And so, that sounds dark. I don't think that she means that in totality, that there is no such thing as love. But in this sense, in these stories, love is just of the perfect self because the other acts as this mirror. And so that's true in this play. That's true between the individuals, but it's also true between the West and the East, right? That people who obsess about quote unquote Oriental history and culture and archaeology and things like that, like it's because it's reflecting back on you as your opposite, right? That it's unknowable. Its beauty comes from its reflection of your own progressive modern self, right? And again, this is not just about Asia and the Middle East. It's also, I mentioned in the last lecture that Dances with Wolves is one of these too. So it happened with Native American culture too, in a lot of ways. So and so what Kondo is stating is that Gallimard loves Butterfly because she's the perfect Orientalist fantasy. She makes Gallimard believe in his superiority, right? So that's the play. And what Kondo talks about is how it's a power play, and that's what makes him vulnerable. She argues that it's not even a good move what Gallimard is doing by projecting his colonialist fantasy onto this person. It makes him easy to manipulate, right? It makes him, it's not even a good tactical move to do that. And so what made him vulnerable and what brought him down was his investment in this Orientalist fantasy, right? That was his downfall, that he didn't see Butterfly as a person. He just saw her as this Orientalist, fantastical, perfect woman, right? So, but what Kondo does after that is she relates it to world politics, to geopolitics. And so in the course of the narrative, the historical backdrop starts to change. And so and I didn't mention this before, but in the play in Butterfly, as Japan becomes more of a world superpower, their relationship starts to influence their relationship, right? All of a sudden, it's harder for him to maintain this fantasy of Butterfly being inferior, right? Because Japan, and we're still in that historical moment with the rise of the Asian tigers, right? So the gender aspects of their relationship changes. Gallimard becomes the woman, and Butterfly becomes the man, and becomes more dominant toward the end. And Gallimard, because of his investment, finds that unbearable, right? That things are changing. And actually, there's a lot of literature. We've talked about whiteness. We've talked about whiteness in American history. And, there's a PhD, it'd be a PhD level project. It'd be a lot of research to do, but they're starting to be, people are starting to poke around this as a topic of research, like the crisis. You'll see things now. You could Google and find a lot of news articles about the crisis of white masculinity, right? That what the hell is going on? Like, it's more difficult to sustain this idea of superiority when places like Japan and China are becoming more powerful. And so that influences people's identities and influences people's relationships with other people, right? Even romantic. And so Kondo's arguing with Huang that, she's arguing alongside Huang that these things affect even personal relationships. And so you can kind of see the multi-layeredness of gender identity, that there's geopolitics, there's personal identity, there's sexual relationships, there's love, things like love, all of these. I think she sums up her position by, and I love this quote, and I don't think I have it here. I think this is the last slide, but I don't have the quote here, but I just remember she talks about how gender identities are just shifting position. What is it? They're just positions in shifting matrices of power, right? So if you go back to Foucault and you look at power is productive, what does it make? Power is an aspect of relationship, it's a technique. And so what Huang's play shows is that gender and sexuality, she asked Huang in the interview chapter, another chapter of this book, Crafting Selves, she talks about, she asked him, is this a gay story? Is this a gay love story? And his answer to that was like, no, it's not. There's nothing gay about this. It's about gender and sexuality, but this is not a story of a romance between two gay men, because Guy Martin is not gay at all, right? Is Butterfly? Who knows, right? He does what he has to do. Again, power is a technique. Butterfly uses this technique of Orientalist fantasy, uses Orientalist fantasy as a technique to manipulate someone for the purpose of espionage, right? So is it a gay story? He's like, I'll leave that to y'all to decide, but it's not. When he said that when he was writing it, he was not thinking of it as a gay love story at all, because it's so much, it transcends gender, right? It transcends heterosexuality and homosexuality. Is not really about that. So, and so again, he's showing how culturally constructed identity and gender are, and how they're just operate on so many different levels, all the way up to geopolitics between nation states, right? That stuff can influence personal relationships, and so. In the end, she's showing that interventions are possible. Changing the cultural categories by tweaking them in certain ways and challenging them can change our ideas about the other, so that our identities can open up to reflect the relationships between the West and the Orient, or show how they're intertwined, right? That the developing world, or the Orient, or the third world, the second world, whatever you're talking about, that our identities are open to shifts in these areas, right? And we can actually change the way we represent these things. And so, all right, I'm going to stop screen sharing right there. And again, when you look at the film, when I post it, I am going to pull my notes up here. But, I have a couple other things to say about this play, but I'm going to find my lecture notes here, which are not on there. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay. All right. So, and there's things, she's saying that this could be the West's downfall. This could be, this is a vulnerability that, stop sharing. Okay. So this is a vulnerability that, that the West has embedded in it, right? It could be it was one of the seeds of its own demise, as Marx would put it. I mentioned in class before, while we were meeting, that I talked about the Tet Offensive in the Vietnam War, about how they just assumed that the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong would not fight on New Year's, on Tet, which is Vietnamese New Year's. But they did, and that was the day the war was lost for the West, like that. So, it's one of those things, people invested in this fantasy of this perfectly understood Oriental person, not how they're culture bound and they're submit to power, but that's a weakness for the people who invest in those kinds of things. And so that's on the one hand. On the other hand, it has devastating consequences for Asian American identities. And so this whole idea of the exotic beauty, this idea that there are people of Asian descent, women of Asian descent, sometimes that use that do some of the same things that Butterfly does in that play, that to use it to control people, and it gets uncomfortable to talk about. And I can recommend, there are some anthropologists who have done some work. Karen Kelsky has done some work in Japan on that kind of thing, but about how people invest in stereotypes and to manipulate people, and how even the people who were on the lower end of that power dynamic can use those stereotypes to actually as a technique of power to control other people, right? So um, okay, so and I'll end it on, I throw this in. There's an anthropologist, Cynthia Enlow, has done work, and this is how it relates. So okay, so you might be thinking, how does this relate to the real world? How does this matter? Give me another example outside of movies where this matters at all. Like, why are Said and Kondo and Juan talking about movies and operas and plays? And yeah, that is important to look at how that shapes people's perceptions. Um, so I'll give you another example. Cynthia Enlow is an anthropologist that wrote a really short piece. I don't think she ever wrote a book about this, but it's a really interesting piece about how the United States government and the Korean government, in the context of the Korean conflict, or we call it the Korean War, but there was never a declared war between the U.S. and North Korea, but what's now North Korea. But so in the context of the Korean War, the U.S. government collaborated with the Korean government to build, to actually train prostitutes, to recruit and train prostitutes to serve as American soldiers during the Korean War. And it's an expose. Well, okay. Okay, try to mute your microphones because I'm getting a lot of background noise right now. Um, so, um, Cynthia Enlow talks about how, the U.S. government and the Korean government, people tend to think it's like, oh, they're building an American military base in a place, and so these desperate poor women are going to come around. They're going to try to hook up with American soldiers and marry them, or they're going to work as prostitutes because it's an easy way to make money. And they're just, that's why all these men are kind of attracted to Asian women, because they reminding them of this process. But what Cynthia Enlow looked at was that was an orchestrated campaign. That was a project that the U.S. government collaborated with the Korean government to recruit prostitutes, because they had all these theories about what American soldiers need. They need certain things to be effective military people. If they're going to be there for years, they're going to need sex. They're going to need certain kinds of sex. They're going to need lots of oral sex. I mean, this was debated on the floor of Congress. I mean, it's just outrageous that people don't know this history, that, this is like, okay, they need this, and this is what they need to do. If the guy's a virgin, they need to treat them this way. And when they're done with the sex, they need to be submissive. They should, it goes all the way down to part of the agreement was that after the prostitutes had sex with the American soldiers, that they were supposed to kneel down and thank them for their service and for liberating them from their oppressors. Right? So, I mean, again, think about all these movies that you've seen these scenes before. Okay, so why does that matter? All right, well, okay, we did that in Vietnam too. Not everywhere in Vietnam, but in Saigon, this also happened. The U.S. worked with local officials to recruit and train prostitutes to behave in a certain way. We've done it in other countries, and actually, this is, as a historical side note, the one place in the one war and conflict in the 20th century where we didn't do it was in during the first Gulf War. Saudi Arabia refused this, and actually, this is what pissed off Osama bin Laden. This is kind of what set him off, that no, you're not going to recruit women for hiring to serve as prostitutes at your military bases, and that's kind of that was one of the things that inflamed that conflict. That they were the first country to say, no, we're not doing this with you. Like, no, like, go away, leave our women alone. Like, so. And so, why does this matter? Well, over 3 million American male servicemen, over 3 million servicemen served in the Vietnam War from the U.S., right? A lot of them married women. Some of them did marry some of these prostitutes. Not all of them, obviously not everyone who married someone they met in Vietnam was, not all cases the women were prostitutes, but it really impacted that generation's view of Asian women. So where does the stereotype come from? It came from our, as in the U.S.'s imagination. This is not, so these stereotypes about Asian women, about being submissive and feminine, they come more from, those ideas are from here. They're not from observations. They're not about reality. They didn't come from reality. I mean, they may be reality for some people now, but they didn't come from, this was not, oh, this is how Asian women tend to be. It's like, no, it was a fantasy that was taken there and played out through an agreement and then it became just kind of this a whole generation of servicemen came back with this idea that that's how Asian women are. Um, so in those work, the article is called "It Takes More Than Two," so you can find it. Her name's Enloe, Enloe. But just a fascinating, frustrating, infuriating article. It's like, what? Like, and basically, the reason she wrote it was that all these military history museums were popping up in the mid 90s, and they're like, oh, here's a museum commemorating the Vietnam War. And she was arguing that these museums should have these women's stories there because these women's stories are just as much a part of the war as everything else was. And that it's just shocking how many men collaborated on this to train these women to have what kind of sex, certain kinds of sex with American soldiers. So these stereotypes that are perpetuated by Asian women were actually created in the U.S. and then exported to Asia and then brought home by travelers, missionaries, and military personnel as some kind of ethnographic knowledge. So it's just shocking to hear about this. And, as far as I can tell, no one else has tied these two things together. Kondo's work and Enloe's. Like, I don't know, maybe I should write something. But and that wasn't Enloe's intent. But you can tie them together and see how it works. There was an article in the New Yorker or the New York Times. It was recent. It was about 2 years ago, where some of the more famous early 20th century photographs at the Great Pyramids and in Egypt, when people in the U.S. were just learning about all the wonders of Egyptology, around when King Tut's tomb was discovered and all this other stuff. There are all these classic photographs of Egyptian women, right? So again, this is more for the Brits, right? But all of these classic photographs, the nape of the neck, like in the picture I showed you, like that idea, those photographs which were presented and sold to the public again as being archaeology or being ethnography. Things like that, like, oh, look at these exotic women, look at these models of exotic submissiveness, Asian submissiveness. They were, there was a recent, someone who was doing the history on these things actually discovered that all those women in those photographs were not Egyptian. They were not Middle Eastern. They were the wives of the photographers. Some of them were like assistants to the photographers because when they went there, they wanted these photographs. They wanted them to portray their fantasies of these they wanted to create these Orientalist images. But, the local people were like, no, you're not going to take my wife out to the river and shoot these sexy photographs with them because you think that's what it's like here. So they're like, okay, fine, we'll just do it ourselves. And so the females in the crew, people's families, they put them in the poses, they wore the local dress. And then it was passed off in popular media and even in academia as, oh, look, here's a portrait of some Egyptian women doing laundry, and they were kind of posed to be kind of exotic and alluring and things like that, but unapproachable. And they weren't even the local people, so they were they were fake, right? So again, they were images of women created by men, just like Butterfly and In Butterfly, just like some of the prostitution that happened in Korea and Vietnam. This idea, this idea from In Butterfly that only a man knows how a woman is supposed to act, and that's a quote, only a man knows how. That's at one point in the play, Butterfly says that. She says, only a man knows how a woman is supposed to act, right? So that doesn't mean only men know what's right for women. It means that only men know what men expect from women, right? What would be perfect for them. And so that's how he pulled it off in the play. So, okay, so I'm going to stop there. And yeah, it's pretty uncomfortable stuff. And I know that it's uncomfortable to talk about these things. But I think it's important. It's an important moment in understanding identity theory because of how it takes these post-structuralist ideas and kind of Kondo's article takes these ideas in post-structuralism like Orientalism and kind of filters them down to being something that's practical and useful and something that's understandable. So I'm going to stop there. Are there any questions about anything? Like, you can use their hand raising function. I forgot where that is, but I think somewhere on your screen you can raise your hand, or you can just stop. You can just unmute yourself with the space bar and start talking, and you'll pop up to the main screen. Um, yeah, if anyone has any, what time is it? Okay, so that's about 50 minutes. Uh, let's see. Okay, anyone? Okay, so I'll stop there, and I said I've got 18 people, but I don't see 18 people. But so if you have any questions, check out the midterms, and we will have another live class on Monday, and then the midterm paper is due on Wednesday, next Wednesday. I changed it. I pushed it back a little bit. Everyone should have their grades now, except for the one person who I have heard from now, so I do know whose paper that was. And so check out the midterm topics. There are a couple of there about Kondo. I think it's pretty good stuff. I love that article. It's not easy to read, but I think it is it's worth it to just kind of wade into it. The parts that I think are kind of dense and difficult, there's only like 1 or 2 pages of it that are kind of dense. But I think after this lecture and after looking at the other lecture and this one together, I tried to kind of walk you through her argument a little bit, so it should make a little more sense now. So any questions? If there's no questions, I'll log off. I was planning to go to 11:30. It's like 11:50. That was a 45-minute lecture I usually go over in that class. So check it out. If you have any questions, I do have office hours tomorrow. I think I forgot the time, but there are office hours tomorrow. So during office hours, I'll be available on Zoom. You can come here. If I'm not online, shoot me an email. Let's see, office hours are tomorrow from 10 to 11. So tomorrow from 10 to 11, I'll just be here. You can just log on. Last time I did that, I think a couple of people came, but yeah, I'll just leave it open. And if you don't see me there, if I'm out doing something or something, just send me an email and I'll see it. I'll get an alert and I'll come back to the computer. So so I'm going to stop there for today. So I'll see y'all later. So like I said, raise your hand with the screen thing. There's a button where you can do a hand raise if you need anything. So I'll see y'all next class. Have a good weekend. Stay safe. Stay isolated.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, have a good weekend, and I'll see y'all next time. So hang in there. We will get back to normal at some point, I hope.
Hopefully.
I hope.
Eventually.
Yeah. Oh, I just heard that maybe, are there any graduating seniors? Okay, graduating seniors. I don't know yet. I'll find out at the 2:00 meeting for chairs, but I think there's a proposal on the table to do commencement in December. So maybe you may get to walk in December, because right now officially it's postponed. So, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to lower your hand. I see your hand, Emily. Go ahead, ask her. Emily, you did a hand raise. I don't know. Are you muted? Sorry, I didn't mean to unraise your hand. I thought I could click on it and give you audio. Yeah. Oh, your mic won't work. Okay, I can see your question. You can ask it. You can text it. Yeah. Oh, graduating. Oh, okay. You were just raising your hand to show that you were graduating. Okay. Yeah, got it. Yeah, so I don't know. I'll find out more details, and I'll email all the anthro majors and grad students too once I find out more. But in the agenda for our chairs meeting this afternoon, they're going to talk to us about commencement. So I think, if you don't mind coming back in December, there's still maybe a chance that we'll do another. I think they'll just do it in December instead of May. So we'll see. Hang in there so you can still have your families come out and stuff, get the march. So, all right, I'm going to log off. I'll see y'all later. Go eat lunch. All right, bye. Okay.